Hey, Austin, thanks for coming on to 3PL Live. I'm excited to talk to you about your entrepreneurship project. For those that don't know you, would you mind just explaining a little bit about the project you've been working on with the pods?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
Looking forward to our conversation. I'm Austin Kreinz. I'm the CEO and founder of Atomix Logistics. We run a modern day 3PL. So we partner with e-commerce brands and provide primarily fulfillment services. So we help get their products from our warehouse to their end customers, so they don't have to do the warehousing and all the complicated back end operations.
Could we get a little bit of a high level too, just for those folks that I actually work in the logistics industry, so I'm familiar with what a 3PL is, but could you just give us a little high level, like what is a 3PL, like what is fulfillment?
So the way a 3PL is defined, in our case, is it's a third party logistics company. Um, and in the industry, not to go too deep here, but in the industry, a 3PL can mean a wide variety of things. But for us, we're a fulfillment center warehouse. So what that is in our facility, we store goods with barcoded locations. And then when items are placed or ordered online, that is directly sent to our software through an API integration. We'll pack the order to our client's specifications, and then we'll ship those orders out with predominantly the main carriers. So your UPS, FedEx, USPS, they'll come by every day and pick up the orders and then deliver it to the end customers.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about how the idea, or I guess, could you frame a little bit too for like what you guys noticed when you were looking at fulfillment centers? It sounded like they were really big and they weren't really like really personalized for like kind of smaller businesses. So could you explain kind of a little bit of that idea of how you came up with the product market fit for the company?
As e-commerce has grown, and the 3PL and warehouse market has grown, we tend to see larger and larger warehouses, and we can use Amazon as a good case study. I mean, they have 1 million square feet. Warehouses are pretty common for
Huge.
them, and yeah, and for us, as I went through thinking about our company and in the early stages to it, I was noticing there was kind of a big gap between where the market was going and where these modern direct consumer customer centric brands like truly felt and wanted. And one of like the biggest hurdles to get over in our space is outsourcing. It has a connotation of giving up control to someone else and having to trust them to deliver your branded experience throughout that. And as you start to get larger and larger warehouses, one of like the primary driving metrics and factors for a warehouse to look at things is efficiency. And the way you're more efficient is by having very systematized processes with automation and pieces to that. And that's a really important thing to focus on as you're running a warehouse. But there is a balance around that customer experience. And that customer experience not only means our relationship with our brands, but it also means how we're packaging the item. So with the concept and term in the direct consumer space, it's called the post-purchase experience, which is similar to an unboxing experience
Hmm.
as well. So actually how these end customers are receiving the boxes. And some brands go with standard packaging. They're like, hey, I want the lowest cost, just keep it very simple, straightforward. But we have a large trend of the customization to that. So we want custom boxes, custom inserts, and doing that. And I think for us, as we just thought through, it's like, hey, let's create a model that is going to be very personalized throughout that. So we think about scale and growing, but as we think about that, we don't want to turn into an over systematized process where we can only fit very simple, straightforward pick and pack. We want to be able to be very flexible, and that's around that concept around our micropods and our mini warehouses in our facility.
Got it. And tell me a little bit about how you found your like first customer and how did you figure out like how to like actually price this thing and how much research went into that as well?
Definitely went in with our plan and hypothesis to how we wanted to have it structured, but it certainly went through its iterations over the first few months and first year. The way that we first got into it, a quick backstory for me is my family's been in the logistics industry since I've been a kid. My dad started a last mile carrier in Milwaukee here back in 1998 with his brother. their business partner. And so that's how I first kind of was understanding the environment of logistics. And then the year before starting Atomix, I was working in an e-commerce brand, so mid-market apparel company, and I would often talk with founders and network in the industry, and I was always around the concept of outsourcing with a 3PL and the trade-offs of it. Because at our brand, we as an apparel company, we actually manage our own warehouse, and we always would consider 3PLs and talk with them and understand it. And it always just kind of felt like for a lack of a better term, kind of like a generational divide in a way. It was either like, hey, their customer support is going to be handled over email, which we're like, we can't be doing that. Or it was going to be in a warehouse that really wasn't up to kind of how we imagined in respect. So it just seemed like a general divide of talking with them. And I think once I kind of combined those two sides of looking at it from an e-commerce brand, of truly understanding, hey, what these business owners go through and kind of thinking their decision-making process, and then on the logistics side and understanding the efficiencies that go into it, that's when I kind of had my two worlds collide and started. And at that point, I was, hey, let's see if we can get a client or two. I had honestly, it was just reaching out on LinkedIn, DMing people, cold emailing people, cold calling people. I had also a few networks in the industry that helped connect me with the right people too, to get those early clients. But really, those first clients for us were the ones that helped really develop and refine our model.
It's really interesting. I love talking to entrepreneurs because I love finding out like the MVP, like what happened, like did you do to figure out that initial process? And a lot of people got stuck, I feel like too, like even just like overwhelmed by just too many choices and just kind of freak out when like one little roadblock happens. So was there a lot of, I mean, was it just sort of like pressing forward? It sounded like you had the experience from like your family last mile business, so you kind of had a little bit of an insight. But was it kind of just like a hypothesis at first, and then you sort of like start building from it?
There really isn't anyone in our industry that does operations in this way, and we'll get into that like deeper of how we think through the mini warehouses and how we think through having multiple warehouses within our facility, because that's essentially what it is, a larger warehouse with mini warehouses within it. But there isn't really anyone that has done it that way. So it is a lot of trial and error and hypothesis on our end, because there's no really playbook to go off of.
Right.
We can take principles from how you run a warehouse and barcoding locations and what those like solid foundations that we need to have. It involved in two ways. One way, it's I always use the term internally of forced innovation. So when I first started the company, I was fortunate enough to have a little warehouse space at my father's company, but it also was only 500 square feet. So we were literally maximizing our square inches within that facility. Like that's how deeply like we thought about like every area.
Oh wow.
And that was one of the pieces that kind of led to us being like, hey, we're developing this with our clients. They like some of the components that we've added to this, whether it's like just simple things that you stack together, like using Slack as communication. A lot of our brands use that internally. We use that internally. We're like, hey, let's have that customer facing with our customers. So guess what? If they want to reach out to us, they can get a response in 15 minutes. And like, that's what we guarantee as our SLA internally. And they really like that aspect to it. And
That's
then,
fast.
yeah, and that's where then you start to look at the efficiency piece from a logistics perspective. And as we think about these larger warehouses, we say, hey, we're going to essentially put these brands into the 500,000 square foot areas within the warehouse. So now when I think through our management of our warehouse managers, our pickers and packers on our team, they aren't walking across a 1,000,000 square foot warehouse. They're not even walking to other ends of it. They're within that 1,000 square feet. So now we reduce the amount of steps that they're walking, which is one of the biggest inefficiencies in fulfillment center, is the amount of time that you waste walking. And so we said, hey, let's also increase efficiencies on that end, because that'll help with pricing and how we think through costs on our end. And yeah, and then it's the combination of the customer experience and the efficiency, because then at that point we have our managers of those mini warehouses that are the ones directly speaking with our brands as well. So now it's not reaching out to an outsourced customer support overseas or someone that's not in the warehouse. It's, hey, this person is handling your items. And these managers that we hire are like a hybrid type role. So it requires kind of a specific skill set. But yeah, that's kind of how it's been evolving right now.
How does so it sounds like the service is pretty personalized with like the pod manager, which seems pretty cool. How is the service with like a normal warehousing thing? Was it like one person for like a massive amount of clients or something?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably certainly warehouses that do things pretty decent out there in terms of customer support. And I haven't ever worked in a 3PL. I can speak to it of like how I've viewed it or seen it online, and they I think will have account managers. And then yeah, the account manager might have multiple brands under it, and we do it similarly with our customer support here. But it's always so interesting. I mean, I think at this point I've talked with 500 different business owners in the past year and a half, and a big thing is around the customer support. So even if they have dedicated agents, it's like, hey, we're going through an email. It's taken 2 days to get this resolved. I needed this yesterday, or I'm talking to someone that's not in the warehouse where now they have to connect with the warehouse team. So we're like, hey, let's take out all of those links that are taking like of what leads up to longer support. We're like, hey, let's remove those and just connect it directly to the source. And I think that's, yeah, something again that our clients liked early when we were initially developing or just doing operations, because that's all we kind of had to, that's all we had. It wasn't that much space to work with. But that was one of the reasons around it. And again, now we have 4 or 5 different pods within our warehouse here, and it's going really well. And like that's how we kind of continue just to iterate on it.
Yeah, it's interesting too because I've used Slack before at other companies, and Slack seems to be like this sort of like, it's like more real time than email, and then like it's
Yeah.
almost like a phone call ish.
Yeah, I mean, like even last night, we just had this great conversation with this brand out of Canada, and just talking to them, and it sounds so subtle, but the ability to connect with brands, because we think like there is a generational piece to it, like how you're building brands on TikTok and in these different ways, and like what your modern tech stack looks like, and even just how you communicate and work with each other. It really is different, and I think we connect really well with our brands on that side of like, hey, you guys understand what we've been through. Like you guys talk like are developing software that's really putting us first, and how we think through it. And I think those are like the reasons why like we've started to, yeah, I mean, really kind of build a brand name for us, and keep kind of growing here.
I mean, we talked before for a couple minutes offline, but I was wondering too, you'd mentioned that you're using some other software out in the market, but you're going to go out and develop your own. But you'd mentioned that it was actually kind of like a blessing because like you were able to like kind of figure out maybe what was like, lacking in the market. So could you walk me through like what was going on there?
Yeah, and this is going to go back to your question that was 2 questions ago, about the hurdles that we had to go over, or kind of complications. And it's always interesting, like, and this kind of goes back to just a general entrepreneurship thing. It's around the planning side. It's really important to plan, but things will really never go to plan. And for me specifically, when I was starting the company, technology was going to be a really important factor for our differentiator and how we were going to scale and how we thought through that. And try to get on like my best friend who's working at another company, and ultimately couldn't sell him on it too early. So at that point, I'm sitting there, I'm like, hey, technology is really important for us. Like we want this to differentiate ourselves, but I don't really have a solution here, but I'm doing this company, and we're going to make this work. And so what we did was, and this is a pretty industry standard, is there's warehouse management software, inventory management software is that you license as a SaaS model. And for us, that was never a long-term plan, but here we are, like in the early stage, like, oh wait, we have to do this. And was what we learned from that is I had a pretty kind of straightforward idea of what we wanted to build with the software. Like day one, without even working or building the company, it was like, hey, this is how it has to be done. Like kind of, we know what this has to be. And then after working in that software for a year and a half, looking back at what we were going to build, then it was like, oh wow, like this is a little different. Like we would have gone too deep into certain problems or building the wrong things. And then so after actually using like generating cash flow to like fund our business, use other software tools, kind of leverage those other assets, and then take all of those learnings over that period of time and all the frustrations and the struggles that we had with that software to be like, all right, now we have a really good idea of what we have to build for our customers, based on our own kind of bad experience and other kind of problems with it. And yeah, so we launched that last month. So that was eight months in the making, building, brought on a CTO to run with that. And yeah, we're super stoked to have it because it's pretty awesome.
How much time do you like, did you spend like thinking, or how much time do you like, just out of curiosity, as like an entrepreneur, like how many, where do you get like, do you like have like a scrapbook or something when you have like your ideas? And then like how often like you like actually pursue the ideas versus like just let them go? I mean, obviously when it's a big idea, like the company that you
Yeah.
started, like that obviously probably maybe stuck around for a while, or how much like time like went in between like the thinking stage versus like just executing, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I dream like about work related things, and it's funny that the first time I met our COO, I never knew him before. I hired him off LinkedIn, and he's been my partner since then, and we've just connected since day one. And he made a comment like that to me after 3 days, and I'm like, all right, this guy and me are on the same page because truly, like my brain doesn't stop with it, and it's fun, and I love it. And actually one of my biggest things is I lose my notes of where I take them. So I mean, I have sticky notes, I have notepads, I have notes on my phone, Word docs, drafts of emails. So it's just the constant kind of obsession around, hey, how can we do this better? Like, what are people doing out there? What do our customers want? And just constantly like really like thinking and obsession about it. And like some people think that at times I take like work too serious and I think about it too much, but I think that's what's so important. And I think some of the hardest pieces about like the early stage of like entrepreneurship is like what you have in mind is not always going to be that end product. And you have to understand what right decisions that you have to make with listening to customers. You can read books and be like, listen to your customers. And it is so important. But in terms of prioritizing certain tasks and certain software features, that's where it really takes kind of the next level of understanding of hey, what has to be built today versus what has to be built in a week or two. And I think that's the hardest piece really to even just anything with our company here. It's around the prioritization because like the most limited resource that we have here is our time. And we have so many things that we want to do on the software side, on our growth side, on our warehouse, on automation, on different aspects. But it's really important to understand hey, where are we at today? What's the most important moves that we have to make as a business with our capital, with where we're at in our size, where's our industry at? And you really just have to start to feel out the market. And the more that you're in it, that's when you start to feel it. And if you're starting to make those right moves, you'll start to see the momentum and you'll start to see it. And hey, for some people, it takes 2 months if they raise some money and they can kind of build something quickly there, or it's going to take you 5 years. Like you'll hear a lot of different stories. And I think it's really just around just like getting started and getting into the weeds to it. And you'll know after a few years. So
Yeah. How do you find out like what to build? Do you talk to your customers quite a bit, or do you interview them a lot? Because it seems like obviously customers are the best way to figure out what to build,
yeah.
but sometimes a lot of people probably don't make the time to do it for whatever reason.
Yeah, totally. And I think what's awesome about our space and just connecting with people, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's at networking events, people want to help other people. Like I have a strong belief in that. Like I've talked to probably 10 people alone that aren't clients of ours that are in the direct consumer space that we've just met that are like, hey, you guys are launching a new app. Let me walk through it with you. Let me give you feedback on it. Let me tell you from my point of view. I'm using another software. I'm having pain points. Let me tell you kind of where they're at and show it. And for us, like I love that. And it's awesome that they're willing to do that. And so I think it's really important because at the end of the day, it's like as much as like I want to believe that, hey, my idea and everything I put into this, like everyone else wants, it's like that's not the reality of this. Is you have to listen to your customers and see what they're saying. But to my point earlier is you have to understand what you want your core market to be, because you don't want to start building features because you have fringe cases that one person wants a nice to have feature when you really should be building a required kind of documentation to an API or something. So
I get that. Yeah, no, we actually, the company I work for, we build transportation management software, and our CEO is like one of my good friends, but he always talks about like how like, you know, we have like say like a couple hundred clients and then we'll have like one client that wants like one random thing that they do
Yeah.
things differently. For example, someone wanted something where like, I don't know, something to do with like an export wasn't like, it didn't look great for printing and we're trying to go like more digital. So it's just like one of these things where a lot of the times your customers will pull you into like these weird situations where like
Yeah.
you need to build what's like best for the entire ecosystem. But
Yeah.
sometimes you get pulled into this like weeds. Sometimes I feel like with certain customers, and you almost have to be
Totally.
like, hey, like that might be something on the roadmap like later on the road, but like now it's not. So I get that. Like you have to be really like strict, I guess, right? With like the resources that you have and like how you're like building.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's such a good good point because and now where it always becomes troublesome is if they're your top customer and it's like, oh God, all right, well we have X amount of revenue coming from, so maybe we have to build this out. But yeah, no, it really is. And I think what's so awesome, like truly about the technology space today, and I'm not a computer science technical background at all, but I do have like an obsession with knowing what tools are out there to kind of expedite building processes. Like it's incredible of like where we are in 2022 compared to even 2015, 2018 in terms of where we're at with microservices and APIs and other tools out there. And so what I always talk with our developer about is like, hey, what is out there that we can leverage that can speed up what we're doing here? So if it is a fringe case for someone, it's like, hey, let's spend an hour to see if there's a tool or if there's some open source software that has what they're doing. That, hey, guess what? That's gonna be a 20-hour project, build, testing, iterating, and we're not going to put that into it. But if we spend an hour to see if there's a tool that we can spend an hour or two on to build for them that can do like the similar result that they want, it's like, oh, okay, because it's there's
That's it seems like with the way software is going, like it's like the base layer, and then you connect all your APIs to get all the other stuff that other cool people are building, you know?
yeah
So I completely agree with that. I feel like if you have like a really solid, easy to use like base capture layer, that like everything else sort of just could build on top of that. But yeah, that's fascinating. How do you guys look at like how did you guys find your first customers? I mean, you said LinkedIn. What
yeah
about now? Are you guys how are you guys finding customers now? Is it referral, word of mouth? How do you view like digital media and things of that
totally.
nature?
Yeah, a pretty interesting take on this too. So right now, though, predominantly referral, word of mouth. Like we don't have any paid media, paid ads. We just don't really have that budget for it, and we've really
It's
just been
pricey.
focusing. Yeah, we've been really focusing on the organic piece, and we'll get there maybe mid next year or so,
Yeah.
because it is an important channel. But for us, as we just kind of look at our budget, we're like, hey, let's I mean, day one it was, hey, let's get a few, and honestly, it was just me hustling out there, LinkedIn, talking to people, seeing anyone in anywhere if they want to ship 10 things a month or if they wanted to ship 10,000, like didn't matter where I was going to kind of make it work. And so I guess now we're at the point of I brought on a sales manager 4 months ago. We just brought on another one, and we just brought on 2 marketing team members as well over the past week here. And it's really all around thinking about our scalable systems that we can implement. So there's a few different. So I'll go to my hot take first, real quick.
Sure.
I think on the beat, and this is going to be a pretty generalization, but I believe it pretty wholeheartedly. Marketing is severely under valued by a lot of B2B companies. When you start talking about building a brand and telling your story, and honestly, we don't even do it great today, and that's why I'm bringing in a team to help me kind of do that. But to really think through those elements to it, I think it's undervalued quite often because there is so much potential behind marketing, and there's okay, you can say, hey, let's do blog posts, but like, what do you really mean by that? Like, how do you really write that copy that resonates with your customers? How do you think through deeply the links and working with partners? And I think that's where we really are focusing as we're building our team around this is what can we do with our resources and how can we scale that quickly? Because we have a tighter budget, but we can create like a ton of value by thinking through different strategies of repurposing content, of finding creative ways, and just stealing different principles from other great companies out there. And even when I think through our target market, it's modern direct to consumer brands. So a lot of our clients have big TikTok followings, and as we think about building out our ecosystem, it's like, how do we do things that I haven't really seen anyone in our space do? And that's what really creating high quality content around their brands, around their products, to tell their stories, that they want to share that with their audience. And then we want to connect brands together and create content around that. And I think that's what we'll probably get next year. That's like the next level piece to it. But it's seeing what's out there and seeing what people haven't really imagined, and why ultimately it would be valuable to our customer, because that's all we care about at the end of the day. It's like, how do we provide value to them? And now if we're a partner that is involved in TikTok in these different areas, and not just to kind of boast ourselves and talk about sales, but to show people, understand like how the 3PL market works, but then even just value to our brands of, hey, we can make cool videos for your products. We can connect you with our other brands. And there's just a lot of, I think, value that's untapped in our space, and how logistics companies think through it, at least on the 3PL side.
Yeah, I like that. I think content's becoming really huge over the last, I don't know, 5 years, especially with like LinkedIn and being, you could actually do stuff on there for free, as far as like not actually having to pay. Like a lot of people not lack, but a lot of people forget about like the stories. Like you'd mentioned, like, your family business, and like, like your dad was like in the business for a while. I think it's interesting because stories do resonate with people a lot. So I thought that was really interesting too, because I feel like a lot of like old school, like a lot of times when I worked in like the SaaS world, like you'd see like these pitch decks, and they were so focused like on like the company and like, how many years they had been in business and how many like, and it was all about them, right? Instead of
Yeah,
like, which is like interesting.
we're actually going through, and so we're totally going under the hood here now. So we are doing a full website revamp with our new software, and I'm working with a consultant. He's a co-founder of another company here in Milwaukee that I've known for some time. And as he's walking through our marketing strategy, I was like, gosh, the structure seems like similar to something I've seen before. And he's like, oh yeah, this is like the story brand, and like like we've documented our whole thing really foundationally off of Donald Miller's
interesting
strategy to it. Yeah, and that's
fascinating.
Yeah, and he knows it. Like I said, I'd give you a terrible summary right now, but he knows it like the back of his hand. And as he's walking through it with me and really creating this playbook for us, it's fascinating to see how we take thinking through the story like that and translating that into a website, and how we really talk with our customers, because it like he has so much data and so much kind of principles behind like what he talks about, and why you should follow it. And there's a lot of great reasons behind it. So yeah, that's what our consultant was walking us through the other day. And yeah, so we've been deep on it. Yeah.
It's fascinating too. It's always hard too, I find, to figure out like what words work, and like they're always best, I feel like, when they come from the customer. Cause like, for example, like I interviewed one of our customers and he's like, yeah, your US based support is like really great. And to me, like I would have never have like, I would like, like I would have been like, maybe that's cool or whatever. But like, I think it's when you hear it from their mouth, it becomes a little bit different, right? Like when it's like, and the other thing that I thought was interesting is like this concept of like user generated content, like where you're like trying to get your customers or your employees to actually post. I don't know, like incentivizing that. I think about this kind of stuff, but I'm like, how do you get them to post?
Yeah, no, and that's so I have 2 points on that. So on the user generated content, actually, we really haven't started touching that much on our side. I think there is a creative way we could do something with it. I think it's pretty applicable on the physical product side if you're a direct consumer brand, and thinking through that and leveraging that. And I think at the end of the day, for that, it's definitely harder on the B2B side, so you have to be creative to it. But on that side, it's like, hey, if you got a great product and you know how to get to like the right influencers, and then there's a lot of different strategies that I've like read on Twitter and I've seen around. If you got a great product and you are a normal, like good person, like they're gonna generate like good content if you give them like the right playbook and things. But I think for us, like as we even go back to like the story brand and things, it's like, hey, people are going to be on our website for seconds. People, and then once if they're actually engaged, like they'll read it for a little more. But then it's like you got to boil it down and tell your story pretty easily for anyone to understand. And like I always use the reference of, hey, I want my mom to go on our website and understand what we do very quickly. And I think for that is like the main things that we're solving for. It sounds like quite a few, but at the end of the day, it's like, hey, we want to make this easy for our customers to scale their business, and we're doing that through our fulfillment services. And I think for us, it's super important because the 3PL industry is very large, very fragmented. But there's also a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes about it too. Of all 3PLs are hard to work with, and I think for us, it's like, hey, we have this modern approach to this. And this is all of the kind of intricacies that we think through from the operational level. And this is why it's important from both the technology perspective, but then also just from a value out of your time of utilizing a partner that can help on that side. So for us, it's hey, we're saving time for our brands. We want them to focus on creating content, launching new products. Shipping out a product, fulfilling a product is very important, but you don't need a PhD in logistics. Now, if you want to build out your own warehouse network and logistics, there's a lot of value to that. Like, you have control, you have that oversight, but you have to understand that you're getting into that business. Like, there is more management. You have to use the right software tools. You have to have the right analysis to actually really create an efficient warehouse. And if you're willing to do that, I think that's spot on. Like, go for it. Like, we walk through customers all the time of how to do it the right way themselves, and because we just want to be helpful and valuable to them. So but with us, it's, as we think about our market, like I said, large and fragmented. There's two kind of sides to it. Your mom and pop 3PLs on one side, and you have some more tech centric 3PLs on another side. And for us, we're like, hey, let's combine those two worlds into one. Let's the value that mom and pop provides is very good customer support, generally speaking. And we're like, hey, let's do that with a modern approach with Slack. Let's be kick ass in customer support. And then when you think through the tech centric companies, what they do really well, we're like, hey, some of them do a lot of things very well, but as I've seen in the industry, the complexity to the software continue to get harder to manage, more features, more onboarding, more training. We said, hey, let's distill that. Let's make it easier. Like, let's have less like training and initial upfront learning to it. Like to really think deeply through product tours for how our brands are going to be on at day one. And so, like, literally my mom can go on and run the software, because like that's how easy we want it to. Because when you think about the main value add of a 3PL in our space, it is ultimately to save them time. So if they're spending hours on integrations, on trying to do reports, trying to do these things in our software, that's taken away from your main kind of value. It's, hey, you want to come into our software, see what you have to do, what action items you need to take, what your high level numbers are looking at, when you need to reorder stock, and what those timelines look like. And then you want to be out of it. And I think software, as you build, and it'll be interesting because, again, I haven't created a more complex enterprise solution. And I think we're always going to really focus around the small and medium businesses. So that could be just a natural thing that I haven't learned yet. Maybe it's a requirement that it has to get more complex as you focus on those customers. But I think for that, I think you have to really test yourself and really push yourself to be like, how do you make this easy? How do you have less clicks? How do you move around the software? Because at the end of the day, that's what creates a better experience. Like, not trying to figure out where to click and these things. And I think that's what we try to do, is like think really deeply about those little elements that seem so minor, of where you put icons and where you put chatbots. And I think just really thinking deeply about those little things, like that's where we're trying to just combine all of that value. And we're trying to still just prove out our concept and where we're at. I mean, we've grown a ton, but it really is just around doing those kind of things.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I feel like it sounds like probably too, like a lot of companies probably look at like shipping as like an afterthought. They're not like super like just like, hey, let me figure out shipping and all gung ho about it. So it's probably nice to have someone like a partner like you guys figure out like all the nuances of all the shipping, so they could just focus like on just their brand, right?
Totally. It's like, hey, they want a good experience for their customers, and that's a big thing for us, like with our growth here, and because a lot of it is word of mouth referrals from our customers, and that's how we think through it. Because I'm still building a company, building a brand on our end. Like, I need to make sure my customers have a kick-ass customer experience, because there's a true difference between good customer support and great customer support. If you have great customer support, guess what? These brands will now naturally be advocates for you if they truly feel that you give them 110% every day. If you have good customer support, that's fine. And a lot of large organizations do just have good, and they don't need great. But I think I always challenge us internally. It's like, hey, what is that? The numbers like of like a scale. If you look from 1 to 10 on like a good to great, it's like, hey, what does that 10 look like? What does a 0 look like? And then let's expand our kind of horizons and think, hey, what would make them like love us? What does a 12, 13 look like? And like, think beyond what we typically imagine. And hey, maybe some of those thoughts are like a little crazy and unattainable. that's fine. And I think it's just having those kind of thought exercises that pushes kind of the mind to just think through it. Because again, our customers are going to be our biggest advocates. And if we commit to a customer, we want to make sure that we do it very well and that they know that we've thought through every element related to their brand.
So your customers, do they generally have like, I'm assuming they have customers probably all around the United States, but some of like the bigger players might have like other warehouses or something like in different states, or how's that look?
Yeah, no, and that's really interesting. Because so right now, I would say, just talking about like domestic and international, we probably do 30% of our volumes international. So we do like international shipments going out. But actually, I don't think it's correlated, but we have like 30% of our customer base international too. A few
Oh,
customers,
interesting.
Australia, Malaysia, kind of all over the place.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and but thinking about additional warehouses, that's a whole podcast in itself right there. Because there is a right time to have that, because what multiple warehouses allow you to do is to shorten your timelines, and lower your costs. Like theoretically, it makes a ton of sense, but there's some caveats to it. And I tell brands this all the time. Even like we're opening a warehouse in the West Coast next year. And even if we had multiple warehouses, I think a lot of early stage companies too early think, hey, we need multiple warehouses. And I think it is a huge value add with the certain characteristics of a brand. What I mean is with a low SKU count, high volume, because you have to understand the trade-offs of, if you are distributing your inventory across the country, you have to essentially double your inventory that you have. So now you're increasing your inventory costs, which is fine if you have the volume that's moving through that over the months. But you just want to make sure that you really nail the right levels of inventory, because the model breaks when you run out of inventory in your West Coast warehouse. And so you're out in the West Coast and now you're on the East Coast, and now you have orders from the West Coast. What do? Do you wait till the next shipment comes in, or do you ship from the East Coast? Typically brands will ship from the East Coast, but now that gets rid of the whole reason for having two warehouses, because now you're going to be paying the costs across it. So it's a super interesting thing, and it is really important. And again, I'm talking in this small, medium business range. I haven't really ever worked at like an enterprise level where they're doing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, because then it is a requirement to have multiple warehouses, and that network is out of my pay grade right now.
Sure.
Get there one day, but yeah, it's such an interesting concept, and I think that's where we sit. I mean, we're in the Midwest, so we reach the East Coast and the West Coast, similar timelines, and affordable shipping. So I think that's where it's interesting, where we're like, hey, even if you want multiple warehouses, unless you've done it before, I would always recommend, hey, work with a partner, perfect it in their one warehouse, and then make sure you expand accordingly, because you have to look at your customer demographic numbers. Like typically, order sales follow population density. So you have California, that's 30 million people roughly, so that's 10%. Roughly the US, larger e-commerce brands will start to see that, hey, 10% of sales come from there. But you might have California brands or products that focus more on the East or West Coast that have a little more density on those areas. And hey, if you have 40% orders running through the West Coast, like, yeah, let's definitely get a warehouse over there for you. Like that's where you should focus for. So certainly interesting.
Very, very interesting. My last question for you, just out of curiosity, since you're an entrepreneur and you probably have a lot of stress and anxiety and uncertainty on your plate at all times, how do you deal with it? Like, how do you deal with stress, and how do you unwind?
On one hand, I think it's part of the job. Like you got to get used to it. And I probably was pretty terrible at the first year and a half of starting this company, because it really was just my obsession and life behind it. I think it really is important to take breaks and to have hobbies and do other things, because it's interesting. Like for probably 6 to 8 months, working out is pretty important to me, whether it's going to the gym and just walking a mile or running a mile or doing a lift for 30 minutes.
Movement.
I got out. Yeah, I got out of it. I got out of it for a few months, and because it was, hey, you got to work and figure this out. And I think even with that, there's other benefits to that than just staying fit. Even just with your mind, and I don't want to talk about this too deeply because it'll be over my head, but I think about different things as I'm working out, and it just kind of
allows you to get to a different space, maybe.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a huge thing of like, hey, part of the job is obsession over it, and you truly have to love it. Like, I think that's the biggest thing to it. And it sounds cliche of, hey, you got to love your job. Like, yeah, do I love spending 4 hours a day in emails or taking care of tedious things? No, but you have to love like the process that you are behind, because it's a commitment. And if you're not 100% in throughout that entire time, it's going to be a struggle to find that finish line, because it might be 5 years, it might be 30, but like you have to understand that it's going to take everything you got. Like you're going to have to take sacrifices. Now it depends on what kind of sacrifices you want to take, but I think it's just important to understand what you're kind of getting into, because it really is it's all consuming. I love it. It's stressful. You get used to it. You're gonna have your highs, you're gonna have your lows. You got to stay even keel throughout it, because the second you close a huge customer, that the next day is
something bad happens.
Someone's gonna hit you in the face. So you really want to celebrate the wins, and I think like even the smallest wins, and that's one thing that I'm pretty brutal at, is ensuring that we like celebrate all little pieces, because I'm always like, hey, what's next? We got to do more, but I do that because having like that positive piece to it, and
it's fuel, I guess. Like the wins are like the fuel to get to the next destination almost.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing with like growing a team, because like for me, it was easy in the early days. It was me, some good close friends, and even with a few other employees, like I'm just like heads down, like we're going, because that's just kind of my nature.
Sure.
But I've started to realize even now, if hey, our team's up to 20, 25 people, and it's really important because we want an awesome place to work. And it's really important to make sure employees like feel that value. They're like, hey, I'm a part of something more, but also like, yeah, each little element to it. And so it's had to make me take a step back and be better at that, because that is important to do. But with me, I'm always like, all right, we closed a $5 million deal. All right, where's the 10?
Next?
Where's the 10? Instead of being like, hey, $5 million deal, that's the biggest one we closed. Like let's enjoy it. Let's have some beers or something. So
I get it. I understand. I completely understand what you're saying. You're like, you're so determined and focused to keep on going, but sometimes like it's the psychology, I guess, of the people that we're working with sometimes maybe that we have to look out for maybe.
Totally. So yeah, it's not just me anymore. It's like, all right, guys, so I'll be reasonable. I'm still going to be determined, but I'll take a step back.
Cool. Well, anyways, Austin, that was a fascinating conversation. I appreciate the time. If people want to reach out to use your warehousing space, how do they reach out?
Yeah, just shoot me an email, Austin, AUSTIN at atomixlogistics.com, or go to atomixlogistics.com. That's ATOMIX logistics.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Follow me on Twitter. Active on there once in a while. Don't have too many followers, so we got to boost that up.
Absolutely. Thanks, man, for the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Jeremy. Great meeting you.